Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today we're talking about books, and this time we have with us Portland, Oregon author Stephen Hanks, who has written two books, 1619, 20 Africans, Their Story and Discovery of Their Black, Red, and White Descendants, and also, most recently, Three Brothers, 1626, The Ancestry of the World up to 1626 and beyond to our day. Stephen, welcome. Tell us about these two fascinating books and what got you interested in the topic.
Nice to meet you, Patrick. Yeah, what got me interested in 1619 and then the new book, Three Brothers, is I love genealogy. That's my passion. I started off as a hobby about 1989, so how many years back then, and started getting more serious into it once I started learning how to navigate through the genealogical world and the different type of records that genealogists access. So I really started taking it serious at that point. Started helping other people, even people who were adopted, trying to locate their birth parents. And of course, at the time, I was working for. I have a little banking in my background, and I was doing a lot of skip tracing. So it all kind of went together. But genealogy has just been my passion, and that's what got me history. And I wanted to do a book about my father's side of the family. That was my first book called A Key Tree. That came out in 2013. And then I wanted to do a book about my mother's side of the family, and that's what prompted me to do 1619. In between there, I took my DNA test. That's very popular nowadays. So many people are taking Ancestry.com. People want to know about their heritage, their roots, their family trees. So DNA tests are just it's just a new tool for genealogists now. And so me and my father both took one, and the results of that just opened up a whole new world. I had all these genetic cousins. I didn't know who they were, how we were related, but certain names kept coming up on the website, all these connections. And as I did research on these names, I found out that a lot of them were free African families.
Wow.
They're free people of color going back even before the revolution. And so I really got excited about that. But originally I wanted to just do about my mother's side of the family. But I tied that in together. And lo and behold, some of these genetic cousins took me all the way back to 1619.
Wow.
Yeah, it was something else.
That's really impressive.
Yeah, it was quite an eye opener. And then, of course, this new book here that I'm doing now, Three Brothers, what I basically did is I just wanted to take a genealogy approach to our world ancestry and the beginnings of mankind, and not necessarily evolution or anthropology, but just from modern man up till now. And I took the story, the biblical story of the story of Noah's Ark. And, of course, Noah, as we probably all have heard that story, he had three sons, which were three brothers.
Yeah.
And so that's where I got the title of that book.
I know I should be able to name them, but...
Yes, Ham, Shem, and Japheth.
Oh, thank you.
And so I wanted to take the biblical viewpoint as well as other legends and myths about the history of mankind and just pull it together. Did these people really exist? And interestingly enough, the story of Noah's Ark is not only in the biblical Hebrew Pentateuch, it's also in the Quran as well as in the Bible. So in all three scrolls, holy scrolls or sacred writings, as some people call them, that story is mentioned. Now, some people might say, I don't believe that all mankind came from just one family. I'm not religious. Okay, no problem. Let's just put the religious legends aside and let's just talk science. And so one of the things that we can appreciate is that genetics has proven that all humans originated from one man and one woman. Each male carries the Y chromosome DNA. Each woman carries the mitochondrial DNA. They call it the mitochondrial Eve. She's the matrilineal, most recent common ancestor of all living humans. So in other words, she's defined as the most recent modern woman from whom all living descendants descend in an unbroken line. So, putting the religious part aside, just looking at it from a science viewpoint, genetics shows that we all originate from one male and one female. Um, Not putting a name to any of them, but that just the fact that we came from one man and one woman. Now, some people might say, okay, that makes sense. I can accept that. But I still don't believe in the legend that there was a worldwide flood that killed everyone, and except for a few survivors who had to repopulate the earth. Okay, again, let's put the religious story aside, and let's just talk facts. And so I started delving more into that, and then just tracing the lineages of those three sons up to our day, and just what I could find out. It was very interesting.
Before DNA genealogy, did you use more conventional or traditional means to try to trace your family heritage?
Absolutely. The conventional means the courthouse records, the tax records, the census records, the marriage records, of course, cemetery, burial records, the list goes on, and deeds, land records. And so with my family, it wasn't any different than anyone else. You use the same conventional tools, except when you get to a point in time, because you're obviously, genealogists have always told me, you start with what you know and you work your way back. You don't start with what you don't know and then try to come up to the present, because you don't know if you're even on the right family tree or not. So you start with what you know and then work your way back. So I started interviewing my parents, my grandparents, when they were still alive, and writing down dates of places where they married, who passed away, where they passed away at, and putting all that together. And so for African American genealogy, it's kind of a little bit unique, because as you go further back in time, you kind of go into that era of slavery.
Sure.
And the 1870 census, if you can go all the way back to the 1870 census, you're doing great. 1870 for African Americans is like a gold mine, because that was the first census where all African Americans were listed by name, because it was 5 years after the Civil War. And of course, enslaved persons had been emancipated. So if you can get back to 1870, it's like a gold mine. You look at, as far as my family, I was able to see where they lived at, who was living next door to them. Very exciting. But then if you want to go back to 1860, that's going to be a little bit problematic, because as we know, many people were still, a lot of things were still going on. Abraham Lincoln was trying to run for president. The southern states said, well, if he wins, we're going to secede from the Union, and so on and so forth, and Emancipation Proclamation. And so the further you go back, that part of our history as far as slavery, it makes it harder to try to locate your family members. But with DNA, taking the DNA test, that's a whole new tool for genealogists.
That really opens up a lot of channels that you previously wouldn't be able to access.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's just been really marvelous. It's just been really something else.
Tell us a little bit more about your experience with that aspect, the DNA genealogy. It sounds like you've made some discoveries about your own heritage.
I certainly have. Like I said, I took a DNA test, my father and I both, and we started finding these names that were showing up on our, you have to register on their website. I took 2 different DNA tests, one with one company, one with another company, and then you have to register your name, and once you register, you are connected with all these other genetic cousins. And we had like about 1,800 connections, myself and my father both.
Wow.
So, but certain names just kept popping up. Names like Oxendine, Goins, Sweat, Collins. And doing the research on some of these, Barnett, doing the research on some of these names, I found out that these were free families of color that had been free for many generations in the United States, even before the Revolution, American Revolution. And as I mentioned, it actually took me back to the first generation Africans who came to Virginia in 1619.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite interesting.
Have you had opportunity to contact any of your cousins?
I have. I've talked to a few. We were both trying to figure out how are we related, and we still to this day haven't been able to figure it out.
Yeah.
Other than we know that their ancestors were part of the free generations. Back at that time, the early 1620s. Like I said, up until 1700, give or take. Then that's when slavery was pretty much, stamped in writing there. But so yeah, I've been able to talk to a few. We've been able to converse and share emails. So that's been good.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Some in Texas, some in California, and some in North Carolina. So
Yeah.
it's been interesting. Yes. Most times we mostly have the concept that when the first Africans came to the United States in 1619, they came over as slaves, and slavery was already here. And if there was anyone that was free, they were manumitted by the slave master, but not necessarily the case. In 1619, Virginia was a colony of England, right? And England was not involved in the slave trade at that time. Other countries were, like Spain, Portugal, but England was not. So when the colonies were opened up in the northern part of America, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, they were bringing over indentured servants. And so, as the story goes, in 1619 there was a pirate ship. There were many pirates out there on the open seas, and they would always try to attack any type of ship that had any type of cargo to see what they could get for themselves. And so they, in 1619 August, they attacked a Spanish ship. It was on its way to Veracruz, Mexico, and it was packed with enslaved Africans from Angola and Central Republic of Africa. So these pirates, they took about 50 enslaved persons off of the ship, put them on their vessel, and they said, let's go to Virginia, see if we can just barter and trade them, not even thinking about the value of what they had. It wasn't clear to English folks at that time the profitability of slavery. Spain and Portugal obviously knew it, and the French, but England was slow in getting involved in that. So these pirates had these 50 enslaved persons, and they came to Virginia, traded them for just food. No money involved, just for food. And they left about 25 in Virginia, and then the other 50 they went down to. They were going to try to go to, I believe it was Barbados, and try to sell some more. But these slaves, they were not slaves when they came to the Virginia colony. They were kind of in a gray area, because again, England hadn't joined the slave trade yet. So they just became indentured servants. They worked a certain period of time for their employer. Some worked 10 years, some worked 15, 20. They were obviously treated like slaves. They were treated pretty bad. I mean,
Yeah, I was
all
gonna
indentured
say,
servants. Yeah.
it must have been rough even after they'd worked off their debt. It must have been tough for them living in that culture of slavery, but outside of the institution of slavery.
Yes. Yes. We know that many Irish worked as indentured servants. Scots, other different European persons were used as indentured servants. And once they, like you said, once they paid off their debt, they were free. They were able to purchase land, and it wasn't any different for the African descendants that came, or for the African descent persons who came. They were treated the same way as everyone else, and so that is what created the free people of color. That was the era. Eventually, England started to join the slave trade about the 1640s, 1650s. They started to see the profitability of it, and with that, laws were started to be passed in Virginia that started to curtail the freedoms of this African community in Virginia, and so slowly but surely different laws were passed. That I think the first law that was passed was in 1639. That it said that the Negroes will not bear arms. So in other words, their arms were taken away from them. And they did this also with the indigenous natives as well. They
I see.
actually treated them more as slaves before they did the Africans. And so eventually between 1639 and eventually about 1705, by the time of 1705, slavery was pretty much entrenched, was pretty much now the law of the land. But in between that time, there were several generations of free African families. And so that was something new to me. I never learned that in school, but
No.
but these names that were on my DNA website, these were also descendants of these families. And so that's kind of what my book 1619 was kind of delving into. So it was very, very fascinating. Yeah. Slavery is nothing new. We've had slavery since the beginning of time. Remember Spartacus, and he was a slave with the gladiatorial games. He was a gladiator, and one night they were planning to break out, and they got betrayed. But some were able to leave, and they fought the Roman government, and Rome was actually afraid that they might take over. Then we have the Slavics people, and how they were treated under the Ottoman Empire. And then, of course, we have Egypt. They had many, many enslaved people from Zanzibar, and they were sent to Iran and Iraq. So slavery is nothing new, but we know that when people talk about slavery today, they usually think of the transatlantic slave trade. And there's a chapter in the book. There's a couple of chapters, but well, there's about 11 chapters. But one chapter I talk about is what started the slave trade. And this was a document that was delivered to the king of Portugal in the year 1455. I'll just read it real briefly. It's called Romanus Pontifex, and like I said, it was addressed to the king of the Portuguese crown, Alfonso V, and the words were, I won't read it all, but basically he's the person who wrote this document or this letter to King Alfonso basically told him to go invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all pagans whatsoever and enemies of Christ, and reduce them to perpetual slavery. You know who wrote that? Maybe you do know.
I don't.
If you go to Italy, we know that there is the Vatican, and it was Pope Nicholas V. So basically, Pope Nicholas V was the one who sanctioned the transatlantic slave trade. And so I talk a little bit about that, quite a bit about it in the book there. So, but anyway, where are we heading in the future? That's the real question.
Yeah, that was my next question. Is there a message for us in the modern world based on your studies and investigations?
Well, the last chapter in the book paints a very interesting picture. I will let the readers pick up on that of what I feel. Yeah. What I feel is is our future, but it ties in very nicely with our past, and we have to. We're all slaves. A lot of people have said that. Even my friends have said that. Steve, we're all slaves. They're just trying to divide us so that they can, conquer us and control us, and that is so true. The powers that be really are the ones that are running the show, and they just got us running here and there, and so. And what's going on even now in the latest news with Ukraine and Russia and oil and so on and so forth. So I'll leave that last chapter for the reader to see how they feel about that.
Okay.
But we do have it is a positive future.
It's optimistic.
It's optimistic.
That's good.
Yes, it is.
Where can people get your books?
You can go to Amazon.com and get it there. You can also email me if you'd like. I could send you a personal signed copy if you'd like. And my email address is Steve Star, S-T-A-R, services @yahoo.com.
Steve Star Services @yahoo.com.
That's right. And but you can get it on Amazon. And if you're a Facebook subscriber. You can also type in the name in the search field in Facebook, and I'm sure it will come up.
And on Amazon, it's under Stephen Hanks?
Yes, with the
Stephen
Yes,
Hanks.
yes, right.
Okay, very good. We'll
Yes.
make sure we put that graphic up. Steve, you also have a very interesting business. In addition to your writing career, you give walking tours of Portland, highlighting Black history. Tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. It's called the Portland Pioneers of Color Walking Tours,
Hmm.
and I started it about about 5 years ago, but due to COVID, I kind of had to curtail it a little bit. We're kind of shut down right now, but things look like it's starting to open up now. But how I got inspired to do that was I was going through some old yearbooks. I went to the Portland School District, and I was looking at some of the old yearbooks like Grant High School and Jefferson High School and Roosevelt, and of course the story of Vanport, which is well known, And as I was going through these old yearbooks, these were like 1920s, I started to notice, wow, here's an African American student. I never even thought, I've been born and raised in Portland. I never even thought that we had students of color that were living in Portland back in the early turn of the century, 1900s, 1910, 1920. And I went through a few more. I said, this is fascinating. So who were their parents? So that kind of was the beginning of wanting to put a tour together, do research. I went down to the Multnomah County Library, went to their old city directories, and it was just amazing how there were so many people of color who had businesses. They were advertising them in the city directory, and I would have their names, their address. Of course, the addresses then are different now, so I had to do research on where they were actually located, and I'm just talking in downtown Portland. So my tour is showing the locations of some of the businesses that many of the early African American pioneers lived or worked at when they first came to Portland.
Yeah,
So
fascinating.
yeah, it's fun. It's been fun. A lot of people have come on it. A few people from different groups have come on it, and it's been a joy. And I hope we can get it going again soon. Things look like it's opening up again as far as wearing the mask. So we'll see if we can get it this summer, get it going again.
I hope so. I think it would be a wonderful attraction for people not only visiting Portland, but also for people such as yourself who've lived here their whole lives who may not know or appreciate that history of our city.
I'm always looking for new stories too, and I got just a few new stories several months ago. So I'm always adding. So if anyone has a story they want to send me, email it to me. I'd be happy to research it and add it on the tour.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Stephen Hanks, for being with us. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
You could email me. That would be a good way, and then once I get acquainted with you, then if we want to be Facebook friends, I can send you a friend request as well. But yeah, just shoot me an email, and be happy to. If you want to do any genealogy, if you need any genealogy work on how to start a family tree, if you're adopted and you're trying to locate your biological parents, anything to do with genealogy or with the book, please shoot me an email. I'd be happy to chat with you.
Sure. Great. And of course, look for your books on the Amazon.
Yes, absolutely.
Very good.
And post a review if you do purchase a copy. Please post a review.
Those are very helpful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again so much. And thank you for joining us.